Hello, dear listeners. Today I will tell you a little bit about artificial intelligence and its development and tell you about the most important task today, the task of recognizing meanings. First of all, I want to talk about how artificial intelligence has changed our world and changed our thinking. Why are we all talking about artificial intelligence at all now? The first thing that catches our eye is that artificial intelligence specialists are very well appreciated in the market. Why is this happening? Because these are people who must have a huge amount of knowledge. And it turns out that it is quite difficult to even learn such people well, because one way or another they must be people who get some practical experience on applied projects. And, even more difficult, this knowledge, which an artificial intelligence specialist possesses, is very difficult to decompose and say that it is possible to replace this one specialist with a group of specialists. In general, when talking about artificial intelligence, there is some misconception, because very often the concepts of strong and weak artificial intelligence are confused. And there are some points that are listed here that a strong artificial intelligence must have, well, in order to be an intelligence that looks like a human. That is, this program should be able to make decisions, present knowledge about reality, carry out some planning, be able to study in a public and natural language, have some willpower, and, in fact, combine all this. The question is that today we are talking about the fact that some separate things have been developed, but we know something about decision making. This is also the solution of some puzzles and games. You all know about chess. The representation of knowledge is an anthological one, which we generally hammer into our programs, and build a representation of knowledge about this world for our program. Well, we can't say that he can imagine something himself, but we can teach him how to do it, carry out some planning, again, within the framework of the ideas that we give them. He can also do it himself. He can study. We know about machine learning, about the fact that we can teach it in methods. We can teach it without a teacher. Natural language tasks are now developing extensively. I don't know about ChatGPT. Even who might not know. Here, of course, the question of willpower is, it seems like a purely human quality, but one way or another. These are the parts by which we define weak artificial intelligence and distinguish it from strong. In general, when they started talking about intelligence, first of all they remember the wonderful scientist Alan Turing, who developed the so-called Turing test, which actually separates what a person has, human behavior and some reasonable behavior that we attribute to robots. And actually, how is science changing with the fact that artificial intelligence has appeared in our lives? The fact is that artificial intelligence algorithms are able to work with a huge amount of information. And when we talked about science earlier, we talked about the so-called paradigm of science according to Aristotle, which was that we observe some object. For example, throw a stone, watch it fly, assume that it flies along some trajectory, conduct experiments, throw a stone a lot once, and then we build a theory about how our hypothesis was confirmed or not, how this trajectory is built. The new paradigm allows us to represent our observation in the form of a model, in which we put a lot of data. The model is trained on this data and a theory is built. Thus, we can carry out experiments without leaving home and build our theories on model data, on simulation models. How artificial intelligence is generally distinguished from machine learning, and what does neural networks have to do with it? The fact is that there is a lot of confusion of concepts here. Anyway, by artificial intelligence in a big sense, we mean that it is some kind of technology that allows machines to simulate human intelligence. If we are talking about machine learning, then this is some part of artificial intelligence. When we talk about how machines improve problem solving by gaining new experiences. When we talk about deep learning, this is exactly where neural networks are located. It is also some part of machine learning, which allows for end-to-end learning by studying functions, extracting some representations directly from data. We no longer put hypotheses, we just fill our program with data, and thus we can get some patterns. But we no longer define these patterns ourselves, the program already defines them. Generally speaking, artificial intelligence was previously divided into two large components: machine learning itself and so-called expert models. Learning takes place in these two directions, but it happens in different ways. The fact is that if we are talking about the principle of inductive learning, then it is, in fact, based on the fact that we determine some general patterns based on private data. We learn from precedents. When we talk about the principle of deductive learning, we are talking about the fact that we have some expert who formalizes known knowledge and transfers it to a computer. The question is how to study artificial intelligence in order for it to be a part of our lives and a part of our thinking today. Firstly, we are saying that the study of artificial intelligence is very strongly connected with the humanities, because this is what allows it to collect knowledge and combine the efforts of programmers and humanities in order to create new professions. Artificial intelligence, in order to study it, it is necessary to form some kind of information culture and a culture of working with data. Also, the study of artificial intelligence consists of different frameworks through which we enter it. This is a frame from the point of view of data. This is the frame of some abstract representations, the frame of setting learning tasks on specific cases, the frame of structural models, the study of algorithms and the projects themselves that we are already going through. Through all these frameworks in order to solve a specific artificial intelligence problem. It is also important that when we study artificial intelligence, we work a lot with data. 70% of our work is working with data, and in order to work well with them, we need to dive into the subject area from which this data is taken. That is, in fact, an artificial intelligence specialist is an interdisciplinary specialist who, with each new task, masters a new subject area. This is a necessary skill in order to really get some scientific breakthrough. When I talk about artificial intelligence further, I will talk more about the tasks of recognizing meanings, because this is now the cutting edge of science, and the question is precisely so that we understand where the boundary of artificial intelligence ends, which can extract some meaning from the data that we give it, and where the human impact begins directly. That is, if we talk about the tasks of recognizing meanings in works of art, then it would be possible to isolate such a huge block of tasks, where both the recognition of character relationships, and the understanding of some path that the character passes through the works. Why the artwork was taken? Because, perhaps, this is the product of humanity that generates the densest and most complex meanings. This is about how the projects for the task of recognizing meanings look like, that is, some task is being set, which includes the study of this literary text. This is necessarily the work of a programmer. It is an understanding of the programming language, rather, first of all Python. This is a good entry point. And actually, the construction of some keywords that concretize this specific task, and the compilation of some dictionary of works on which it is already possible to further build an anthology and use artificial intelligence algorithms. Next, I will talk a little bit about the tasks that I set for my students. Here are the fragments of theses. How exactly do we solve the problems of recognizing meaning? If we are talking about the fact that we need to understand how the characters relate to each other, then this, of course, is primarily an analysis of the characters' dialogues, and these dialogues need to be extracted. A rather important thing is how the characters interact syntactically with each other, and what syntactic forms they use. Then there is a rather important question: how do we evaluate the emotions with which the characters communicate, and what emotion dictionaries we use? Again, in order to build a dialogue, we need to solve the problems of correlation, because we use pronouns in our general speech, and in a work of an artistic type, it can be quite difficult to determine which character or object a particular pronoun refers to. This is a separate task and actually, it would seem, a technical one, but today in Russian, in any case, it has not been solved. Next, it is quite important to classify the actions of the characters. This is an active action. A passive action is some kind of thought process or something that also determines the nature of the interaction. and the density of the interaction of the characters. In this case, we took Margarita Bulgakova's A Work of the Master, and looked at how the character of this work interacts with each other. An interesting project is the study of films, the plots of films. In this case, the task of assigning an age rating to a film was considered, which is quite non-trivial, since in our system, in any case, rating assessment is not always clear to experts, and teaching a car, therefore, is even more difficult. It is all the more interesting, of course, to dive into such tasks, especially when you can explore not only the video itself, but you can also explore the analysis of the plot, you can explore reviews as a text description. So, a rather interesting thing in the whole world right now is the study of the individual development trajectory of both children and adults. Well, actually, here, for example, we talked about the task that was set for children. It is necessary to describe the image that is depicted in the picture, or describe what is depicted in several pictures and put them in order. The question is to use the texts that children use to describe these pictures to understand what children are more prone to, what developmental problems they have and how they can be helped. Also, an interesting story is the projects that relate specifically to emotional analysis, because the classics of emotional analysis today, when we talk about tonality, are positive tonality, negative tonality is neutral, but it can be stronger or weaker. But nevertheless, our emotions are more diverse, and it is quite non-trivial to build an emotional picture of a person, or a work, or communication between people, even regarding some kind of workspace for the task of determining conflicts. So, something happened to my laptop. In principle, determining emotions is not always a trivial task even for a person. And, of course, there is a large amount of data that is related to both face recognition and text recognition. And accordingly, there are many options for how these emotions are broken down, how many classes there are. This immersion is serious enough in psychology in order to understand how to evaluate all this and what is worth paying attention to, how one classification differs from another. What is the advantage of one classification over another? What these classifications help to determine is quite non-trivial. It turns out that emotion recognition in different languages occurs in different ways, because one way or another, the cultural context greatly affects how we perceive an event. It turns out that we perceive these events in different ways. And for example, if we are talking about the translation of a particular literature or film, one way or another, it turns out that we lose quite a lot of emotional context. What else is important to say here? Here, too, are examples of recognizing emotions in individual sentences, and showing how emotions manifest themselves in the speech of characters in books. Next is a rather interesting task. If we are already moving further into psychology, then the task of determining human interaction comes to the surface. Let's say which professional orientation is better for a person to choose, and the MBTI system is quite common in the world, which helps to determine some logical human behavior, predict it and form groups of workers for some processes so that you can build very good communication and get some profit from the group. Actually, such a task was set in Russian language texts. It had not been set before, and quite good results were obtained. I suspect that these good results were obtained because we used a multilingual neural network. Why all these small tasks can be solved? The fact is that if we solve many problems of works of art, then we accumulate some information about exactly how certain ways of thinking manifest themselves in the tasks of artificial intelligence, and then we can say that we can approach the concept of strong artificial intelligence. In particular, I would like to say about the task of determining the meaning in artistic images. There is quite a lot of such practical work here, when we need to detect images and classify them, and a lot of very diverse geometry. But what's great is that these many neural networks can be used by a person who is quite unprepared. Next, I want to say that the important task of artificial intelligence is quite important. The great task is to systematize human knowledge, in order to move to the next level of intellectualization. So, the fact is that knowledge is quite difficult to visualize. When we choose a simple visualization, we visualize a very small piece of human knowledge. When we choose a complex visualization, it is easy for us to get very confused in it ourselves. So actually, here I would like to say right away that, perhaps, knowledge would be good to depict in the form of familiar maps like Google Maps. How can this be done? We can determine that knowledge is the earth, the continent, and not knowledge is some kind of water, and distribute them, for example, into some categories of human knowledge. What are the features of knowledge? The fact is that knowledge changes over time, which means that such a tool must contain some kind of timeline, and knowledge is somehow unevenly distributed. If we say that knowledge is determined by some topics that are determined by knowledge, then, of course, these topics have connections with each other. They may be more dense depending on how many common documents there are between these topics. It is also very important that knowledge can have different depths, that is, we need some kind of elevation map. There may be disputed territories in different fields of knowledge, for example, mathematical linguistics. The question here is what to define in mathematics or linguistics proper. And of course, in order to see how knowledge and parts of knowledge relate to each other, it makes sense to say that some localities are defined on this map. These are some locations for the direction of research on the knowledge map, and some sources of knowledge. They are more complete than others. It is also important to note that people with different levels of education, with different levels of experience have different perceptions of knowledge and, accordingly, the question of how such a map should be built in order to determine the knowledge that is suitable for a person for his work, and for his life as scientific and knowledge that he separates as unscientific. How is all this systematized in the interface? A very interesting work has been carried out, which shows a map of professions, and how these professions are connected, and the competence of these professions is determined. It is important to say that scientific knowledge, unlike non-scientific knowledge, has such features as the documents that this knowledge represents. They are quite different in nature. These may be some kind of reviews that show everything that was in a particular field of knowledge up to a certain point when the review was written, that it could be some kind of strong scientific result, or perhaps it was this article that opened a new trend in science. And the self-determination of the document is also important. Is it some kind of short thesis that was presented at the conference? Or is it some kind of in-depth monograph? It is worth saying that in order to engage in knowledge research, it is necessary first of all to work with large amounts of data of different nature, and develop artificial intelligence methods to analyze this data, so that they can be presented. It is also necessary to develop models, methods and algorithms of some intelligent systems based on modern artificial intelligence methods. And then say that we are creating a system with hybrid intelligence, because today, in order to evaluate knowledge and build knowledge-based systems, machine intelligence alone is not enough. Actually, what kind of knowledge management tasks arise at various levels? This is also the executive level. The most basic level at which tasks are performed is the various models of knowledge representation, or the comparison of scientists among themselves, scientific groups among themselves. This is a higher tactical level. When we are already talking about the fact that we evaluate some scientific content in real time, model the behavior of people who evaluate the work of other people, and so on. And some strategic level, when we already manage the communication of some models of scientific groups to solve certain tasks. Actually, our institute has developed a so-called intelligent system for analyzing scientific data, which today includes automation of the list of publications that scientists work with on certain topics, identifies researchers or scientific groups, or conferences or journals in a given scientific field and can connect them with each other, formation of a glossary on a certain topic, that is, a given list of publications by authors, and so on, assessment of the dynamics of development, how this scientific field develops over time, assessment of the relationship of some areas, how close they are to each other, search for the most influential researchers on the subject, conferences that are worth going to if you are engaged in these studies, search for the selection of reviewers and potential participants for conferences so that invitations can be sent. So, what is the principle of such a system based on? The fact is that we analyze articles of scientific publications, and look at what scientific terms exist there. It is clear that it is not easy to define what a scientific term is. This is not just a list of keywords or some kind of expert assessment. This is also a separate task of artificial intelligence. And, of course, yes, there is a lot of mathematics here. And moreover, these terms do not exist just like that. They exist in a system that consists of three large components. This is the mathematical apparatus, the subject area and the scope of application. Well, basically the mathematical apparatus is where we have mathematical models, the subject area is where the methods are. The scope of application is actually where we apply what we do, and some general scientific terms that run through this area. The factors are further divided into subfactors. They are also divided into subfactors, and there are already terms inside that define a specific field of science. Today, in fact, this is how the pictures look. How laboratories or some other scientific groups of scientists can be compared with each other. It is in the context of various such scientific factors. This means that we have also developed various thesauri. In particular, these are hierarchical thesauri that show the relationship of terms to each other. If one term is defined through another, participates in the definition of the other, then we will say that they are related. But the hierarchy, of course, can be reduced in a variety of ways. This is a huge field for research. This is how, for example, the interface for scientists looks like. A scientist can upload his publications and find out where his place in science is, what he does more from the point of view of statistics. And he can also choose the best magazines and conferences for himself, where he would first of all like to go in order to find like-minded people. How it's all done. This is all done with the help of such an area of artificial intelligence. Now it is one of the top ones, they call it NLP, natural language processing. This is a field of research that is related specifically to natural language processing. Actually, its purpose in this domain is to structure language data into a form with which a computer can solve some problems with this data. Of the solved tasks, you probably all use machine translation in some Google Translator, chatbot also knows what voice assistants, automatic translators are. Well, contextual advertising has slipped you something at least once, but there are a lot of unresolved tasks. Actually, the approaches that were used in the first place are rule-based approaches. Well, as experts, we introduced some rules with which it was possible to formulate a language, but they are suitable for some narrow tasks and scale very poorly. With the advent of machine learning, of course, everyone started running into machine learning because they are very good in terms of accuracy and completeness. However, in order to use classical flat machine learning, it is necessary to do good data markup. Deep machine learning does not require complex data markup. However, in order to train a neural network, a lot of data is needed, otherwise we will have poor accuracy. Well, actually, here are a lot of tasks that can still be addressed and solved. In order to do this, I can recommend the following resources, which can be viewed first and learn how to work with such tasks. How will it all develop further? Yes, today we are saying that if you are engaged in artificial intelligence, then you should have a very high responsibility, because yes, we are starting to say that computers will come and take away all our work. Well, of course, the calculator came and, of course, some types of work disappeared. Well, people who counted on accounts, for example, you won't see them in stores anymore. However, new areas have emerged, and humanity is responsible here. Because we need to be able to develop faster than artificial intelligence is developing. Yes, we are talking about some kind of digital dominance. If some countries are developing faster than others and they have data, then this gives them an advantage. But yes, again, this is our responsibility as scientists. We try to create repositories with open data, so that people all over the world can have this data, train their algorithms and gain new knowledge. Yes, there is a lot of the Chinese experience can be viewed from different angles, about whether it's good or bad when cameras are watching you and watching what you're doing, assign you points. But here, of course, the question is ethical. Anyway, we are human beings, and we are responsible for this. We can say that there is a decision-making system, the same recommendation systems that make decisions for us. Which product is better for us to advise? What is better for us to buy? Where is better for us to go? And yes, this is also our level of responsibility. We need to not degrade and be able to make decisions on our own. As for digital genetics, since we have a lot of data, we can simulate various genetic experiments. Here again, there is an ethical question. And time will tell how humanity will solve this issue. However, we can say that artificial intelligence generates a huge number of professions of the future, which can be found here. And many of these professions are already in demand. You can already get quite a lot of money for them today. But new professions are also emerging. The most unusual professions will continue in the future. Here's a look at what a huge list of professions there is. What you can do if you are engaged in artificial intelligence. Here is a list of software that you need to master first if you want to enter artificial intelligence. By the way, in Calibre there are quite good examples of using solutions to the problem of artificial intelligence. This is a fairly low entry threshold. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for your questions.